very much for the invitation. I didn't know that it was your 25th anniversary, but it's great that I'm joining this let's say event. But yes, we know each other from a cost project called TextLink. I'm going to talk about, and we wrote a paper, and this is why I have this name here at the bottom of the slide. I will talk about that corpus as well as the corpus that we built in my university, Turkish Discourse Bank. So I will tell you my experiences, our team's experiences about this. So here's the outline of the presentation. TED-MDB, Turkish Discourse Bank, and TED Multilingual Discourse Bank, or TED-MDB, are these two resources where texts are annotated at the discourse level following the Penn Discourse Treebank model, or they call it framework. So I will talk about the corpus design criteria, basically. I will talk about how we paid attention to the linguistic characteristics of the language or languages, as in TED-MDB. I will talk about how we considered the mode of texts in the corpus and approaches to evaluation very briefly. I have two parts. I didn't know how long the talk would go on. So I thought if needed, we can give a break between the two parts, but it's not necessary. So first, I will talk about aims and motivations in building these discourse corpora. I will talk about these two corpora that I have already mentioned, the corpus design principles, discourse annotation styles, annotation workflow for consistency, and what can make annotation inconsistent. These will go in the first part. In the second part, I will talk about language-specific characteristics, what we annotate, how we annotate with examples, and some mention of evaluation, and then conclusion. Okay, so we're dealing in these two corpora, we're actually dealing with semantics. But semantics, as we all know, does not only concern the meaning of clauses and sentences, but it goes beyond this level, and it is associated with the senses which hold two discourse pieces together. These are known as discourse relations. There are other terms for them, like rhetorical relations, but we use the term discourse relations, and they are named with the senses they're associated with, like cause, contrast, expansion, so on and so forth. Now, they may be conveyed explicitly via, a discourse marker. A discourse connective is the term that we are using, like then, moreover, or they can be inferred by human annotators, by human people. These are known as implicit relations. Now, like Penn Discourse Treebank, PDTB, we annotate both of them, explicit and implicit ones. So we aim to reveal relation semantics and how coherence is arrived at the local level. We use this term local level because we're talking about the coherence that holds two clauses, adjacent clauses actually, together. So we adopted these goals in both corpora that I'm talking about. And we created these corpora to support linguistic research and natural language processing applications, especially in languages like Turkish, which is not as well developed as English, and also NLP applications in multiple languages. Now, Turkish Discourse Bank is a written Turkish corpus, and it is based on 1/4 of the 2 million word Metis-Turkish corpus. We could only annotate this much, and we annotated it with the support of Turkish Scientific and Technological Research Council. It may be the equivalent of Polish Academy of Sciences, I don't know. And of course, Middle East Tekeli University funds were also used in subsequent stages. So we wanted to provide an empirical basis for discourse relations in creating this corpus, and we wanted to induce discourse parsers for Turkish. Where did I go? Okay. Now, The other corpus, TED-MDB, that we developed as part of TextLink, is a corpus of multiple languages, and you can see those languages in parentheses, including Polish and Turkish. It was later extended to Lithuanian, but when we wrote this paper, Lithuanian was not in the team yet. The annotations are freely available at the GitHub link by Muratan, is one of our team members. And they are also available at this page. This is, you may be familiar with this. This is the discourse relation parsing and tree banking page. They started the shared tasks in 2021, and this year they will do the fourth one. And it's a good resource. It's a good repository of annotated discourse tree banks. It includes TED-MDB and various versions of Turkish Discourse Bank. Now, let me talk about corpus design principles of these two data banks. First of all, in the Penn Discourse Treebank, discourse connectives are called predicates, just like, you know, verbs are predicates at the sentence level. Connectives are predicates at the discourse level for Penn Discourse Treebank, and they have binary arguments, only two and only two. This is different from syntax. And they're called argument 1 and argument 2. And the criterion for argumenthood is described by the PDTB people, Asher's abstract objects, basically eventualities and other abstract objects. Now, this is the first criterion. The second one is adjacency. It matters for discourse, for the incremental interpretation of discourse. I mean, when we read text, we build meaning incrementally. So we reflect this understanding to our annotation by annotating texts that are adjacent to each other. Okay, and we always ask our annotators to mark discourse relations anchored to a connective, explicit or implicit. Okay, now this approach, I mean, PDTB framework focuses on local and relational coherence. Now, there is this other theory, and I understand that Manfred also presented to this group, RST, rhetorical structure theory. Now, unlike RST, the PDTB does not follow the nuclearity principle. Okay? There's no nucleus and satellites in the PDTB framework. Therefore, it doesn't assume a hierarchical discourse structure either. It's a flat understanding of discourse. So also it's good for the annotators because the annotators do not have to keep the global structure of the texts. So instead of the nucleus and satellite, the concepts of arg1 and arg2 are evoked in PDTB. In my understanding, I mean, in my experience, they are relatively easy to apply to texts. So argument T2 is based on a syntactic criterion. It is the text span that hosts the connective, and I will write it in bold in the examples. And argument 1 is the other text span. If you want more details about this, I'm more than willing to do that. Now, I have a couple of slides that I borrowed from Bonnie Weber and Manfred Stede's talks within TextLink. So according to them, in RST, the first instructions for the annotators is the text composed of recognizable topical units? If so, mark the boundaries. So this is not something we do. This is one of the differences. When assigning a coherence relation to a pair of text bands, one of them may be central in RST and the other would be nucleus, okay? But whichever approach we take, I mean RST or PDTB approach, although there are differences, I would like to argue that there's a single shallow discourse structure which is constructed incrementally. Because when you look at the annotations at the end, you see a lot of similarities between RST relations and PDTB relations. But the difference lies in attention given to nucleus and satellite and global structure and so on and so forth. Okay, in the PDTB, relation senses are organized hierarchically. That is, there are top level, 4 top level senses at the top of the hierarchy. They are specified by second level senses, and in certain cases, they're specified by third level senses. So when we are annotating, we write, for instance, contingency. This is the top level written in capital letters, which is specified at the second level, cause, and even more so at the third level, which is reason. So the relation is a reason relation, essentially, but we start from the top to give all these details about the semantics of the discourse relation. Also, this hierarchical organization reflects the idea that there's a small core set of relations that hold between the situations described in 2 text spans. That's why I was saying there are similarities in PDTB and RSD and maybe other discourse banks. In the PDTB, there are symmetric relations and asymmetric relations. Symmetric relations are like conjunction, disjunction, instantiation, and the hierarchy stops at 2, level 2 for these. But asymmetric relations, for instance, asynchronous or cause, these are annotated at the 3rd level. So those of you who are not familiar with the PDTB sans hierarchy, here it is. There are 4 levels, 4 top levels, a number of second levels, and for some of them there are the 3rd levels. So the annotators are first made familiar with this hierarchy. They're told what each is, and then they start the annotation. This is the PDTB annotation tool. You see Turkish here. Eventually we shifted to Turkish. So this has 3 planes. The text appears here. This is the annotation plane. This is where things are annotated, and this is where the resulting annotations appear. So it is applicable to all the languages. It's very, very easy to use. Annotators find it quite easy to use. But certain things are tricky, which I may have time to talk about, but I'll now skip to the next slide. So I have talked about several corpus design principles so far. Another one, a very important one, is the minimality principle. The PDTB's minimality principle. Here are 2 examples I want to give you from the PDTB. One is a concession relation. The other is a conjunction relation. Now, in the concession relations, I'll give you a second to read it. Okay, now, not the whole sentence, but only part of the sentence is annotated. This is what we mean by minimality principle. Minimality principle means annotate the part of the sentence which is linked by the explicit or implicit connective. Those parts should be minimally necessary for bringing about the semantics that holds between the 2 arguments. So this part is left out. Okay, this part is left out. So here's another one. And in this case, the annotation starts from the noun clause, grammatically speaking, from that, and it continues till the end. The idea is that part is enough to bring about the semantics of the semantics. Now, the PDTB has created a tool, which I have just shown you. They also have a browser. Now, the browser is very helpful, I think, for the annotators because the annotations in the PDTB has been built on Penn Treebank, which is a syntactic level annotation. So the annotators, you see, there's this bunch here, which is not annotated even at the syntactic level. So for the annotators, this is pretty easy to annotate the discourse at the top of this syntactic level. We didn't have this opportunity when we were building Turkish Discourse Bank and TED-MDB. We didn't have a syntactic annotation. So annotators have to interpret the texts themselves. They have to decide which part to leave out and which part not to leave out. So again, going back to minimality principle, this is from the browser again. The minimality principle may lead us to annotate attribution. Yes, this part shows attribution. So the parts you see in yellow and blue, the arguments of end, are actually under the scope of the attribution here. So attribution is also annotated. To whom an idea is attributed. Okay, PDTB also annotates this, and it helps. The minimality principle also helps to bring out this kind of annotation. So let me talk about discourse annotation styles. RST has a segment-based annotation. First, it asks the annotators to segment the text into segment the text into nucleus and satellite. Other frameworks like PDTB and Chinese Discourse Bank can be called punctuation-based annotation, but in TED-MDB and TDB, we didn't use punctuation. I will talk about TDB in a moment, but TED-MDB, as you know, is based on transcripts of TED Talks, and TED Talks are spoken, so there was no way we could use written forms, punctuation for TED-MDB. And finally, there's the connective-based annotation, which the PDTB follows. So in the segment-based annotation, this is Bonnie Weber and Manfred Sted's text link slides again. They divide the text into minimal segments. They link adjacent segments via a coherence relation. If there's a complete spanning tree, they stop, otherwise go to 2. So this requires a very clear description of what defines a minimal segment in an RST. There are elementary discourse units, EDUs, and it is useful for definitions of relations and some procedure on how to specify their order. Now, in punctuation-based annotation, an explicit discourse connective that doesn't appear with punctuation will not be annotated. I don't think PDTB uses this, sticks to this rule very tightly, but apparently Chinese Discourse Bank does. We didn't use this at all in TED-MDB. So the annotation workflow in connective annotation is that potential discourse connectives are identified from a group of syntactic units like coordinating and subordinating conjunctions. And then each text is automatically annotated, highlighting the presence of potential connectives. And then if it expresses an abstract object, it is annotated. But the second part was not applicable in our case. I mean, neither in TED-MDB nor TDB. The PDTB used a pre-annotation stage. In the connective-led annotation, we use the notion of abstract objects, events, states, propositions, and so on. And this usually means clauses, finite or non-finite. We also annotate connective modifiers. These are adverbs, usually, that constrain the sense of the connective, like only, then, largely, because. They were annotated together with the connective. In Turkish Discourse Bank, we annotated then and only separately. So there are differences to what you can do. PDTB also annotated it together. So how about guidelines? Now, guidelines are essential for any annotation task. So we tell annotators what should and should not be annotated, how to annotate a token, how not to annotate a token, and what else they must or must not annotate. So this is a quick comparison of the corpora that I'm talking about. PDTB is 2 million. Explicits and implicits are annotated at the intra and intersentential level. Okay, connective, so both explicit and implicits. Connective modifiers annotate senses and attribution. So it is a full yes in PDTB case. TED-MDB is much smaller. 5,000 or 7,000 verbs per language. Explicits and implicits are annotated at the inter and intra level, but implicit intra-sentential annotations are only partial. We annotated it after we published that paper together. We annotated only Portuguese, Turkish, and English because the team was disturbed and dispersed, and we could only get in contact with certain people. TTB is, we have several versions. 1.0 is 400K, 1.2 is 40K. In this version, only explicits were annotated, implicits were never annotated, and intra-sentential implicits were not annotated either. Senses were not, and attribution were not annotated. So TDB1 is quite big for our, in our project, but only explicits. But TDB 1.2 is a smaller subset of TDB 1.0, and we annotated everything except attribution. But at the moment, currently, I'm working with a graduate student of mine to annotate attribution. Okay. So here is a quick annotation workflow for consistency. We write guidelines, we annotate the texts. While annotations are going on, we hold meetings to understand what's going on with the annotations or whether annotations are going on in the way we want. We check annotation consistency, inter-annotator agreement. If it is low, we go to number 1 and revise the guidelines, and we repeat the cycle this way. It is an ongoing project. It never stops until the project finishes, actually. Now, Bonnie Weber's ideas about, I'd like to present, I mean, these are her ideas, and we liked them very much, and we applied those ideas in our annotation style. Let me introduce them to you. For instance, she mentions which things, which aspects of annotation guidelines may be incomplete. For instance, we may have ambiguity, that is, different readings may be assigned to different labels, and annotators struggle with this a lot. There may be annotation errors, just human error, wrong selection. Guidelines may not be perfect. They may not be propagated to earlier annotations. And there may be linguistically very hard cases. That is, guidelines may be inconclusive. For instance, in the PDTB 2.0, contrast and concession were very difficult to separate from each other. But then they fixed it like that. I mean, they created very explicit guidelines to help annotators decide which sense to use, contrast or concession. And they also had relations in, their observation was that relations involving yield may be intentional, which has to be annotated as purpose, or unintentional, which has to be annotated as result. I put it in my slides because I like the idea, not necessarily having to do with yield, but in a general sense as well. I think we can tell annotators to use intentional for, purpose for intentional acts and result for unintentional acts, not only with yield verbs. I think this works. So I have a number of examples here, which you may want to, browse very clearly, where purpose is annotated and where result is annotated. Okay, another difficulty, another hard case that was noticed after PDTB2 was published, Arc 2 of contingency relation was always taken as the antecedent. However, okay, let's look at the examples. In these examples, Arc 2 is the if Mr. Krenz sticks to rigid policies, the pressure from the Soviet Union could intensify. Or should USX be left with only Marathon, Mr. Corey might well feel pushed to scout out other energy companies. Okay. However, while correcting the annotations, the TDB team noticed that arg1 of and expresses the antecedent of a condition relation, and they updated the relation. So these are interesting examples. For instance, call Jim Wright's office in downtown Fort Worth, Texas these days, and the receptionist still answers the phone, Speaker Wright's office. So this and corresponds to if, and the arg1 of the arg1 expresses the antecedent rather than arg2. Okay, so these were hard cases, and they updated the guidelines accordingly. And I have to tell you that we struggled with such examples in Turkish when we were doing in Turkish. So annotation manual is very, very helpful indeed. So this brings me to the end of part 1. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'll go on with the second part then. Okay. So talking about Turkish, how did we consider how did we take language specific characteristics of Turkish? Now, Turkish uses suffixes. It's a heavily morphologic. It's morphologically rich. Okay, so it uses converbs, what we call converbs as discussed connectives, as well as single words, just in English, and phrasal expressions. We called it phrasal expressions at the initial stages, and then we decided there are a form of alt lexes in English. So here is one example from TED-MDB, the English one, and the Turkish one is here. Okay, in the English one, the connective is especially when. Okay. In Turkish, it is the especially, this one is the especially, özellikle, and this one is the suffixal connective. It's here. It goes to the end of the second argument. So we had to take into consideration these suffixal connectives, what we call suffixal connectives. It means when, basically means when. This was confusing a little bit for the annotators because this is not a fully inflected clause, but it has a subject, but there is no tense here in this clause. That's why I said it's not fully inflected. But we considered if there's a subject, then we considered it. If the subject can be inferred, we considered it a clause. Okay, a clause that can be annotated. So this is something that we added to the corpus, not only single words and phrasal expressions, but also suffixal connectives. We also annotated postpositions. Here's an example. I drew as Ali showed, as. Gibi is the equivalent of as. However, it takes this suffix. It assigns in the linguistic terms, it assigns a nominalization suffix to the previous verb. So we use these nominalization or subordinating suffixes as signals for clauses when we're doing this. We only annotated gibi, and then we took care of these nominalization suffixes in post-processing, because it would be very difficult for the annotators to annotate this suffix as well as the connective. Maybe we should first have morphologically analyzed our corpus before we annotate it, but we didn't want to do this because there's so much morphology that the language involves, and we thought it would have been more difficult for the annotators to pick the right part of the sentence when dealing with morphology. So we decided to first annotate the connectives and then take care of morphology in the second stage. Yes, we devised annotation guidelines as always. First, we annotated explicits, only explicit, and then implicits, both intentionally. Punctuation was only considered for implicit discourse relations at the intersentential level. So they considered full stops, colon, semicolon, and a question, sorry about the typo, question mark, when they were detecting implicit discourse relations. And for implicit ones, annotators inserted an explicit connector that best expresses the discourse relation. There are also entity relations. These are a type of implicit relations, and a sense category is not assigned to them. The second sentence provides more information about it. Now, in Turkish, entrails may be conveyed directly or by per drop. So per drop in Turkish helped us. I mean, it was a challenge for annotators, but when there's per drop, we said this could very well be an entity relation. Because an entity relation is a continuation of the previous sentence. It is an expansion of the previous sentence, and this is exactly what per drop does in Turkish. You expand the rest of the text with per drop. As long as there is per drop, the topic continues. So we use this concept in annotating entrails, but of course, annotators had to be careful. It should be that the second sentence should provide more information. It could have, they should be careful because per drop could also trigger implicits. Okay. So here is an example from TED-MDB. This is, again, part of the sentence was annotated, only this part. There was their prosthetic sockets, etc., and this part. This is a very clear case of entity relations from English, but entity relations can also be indirectly expressed via bridging inference or, okay, here is an example. The whole house was painted white, the doors were green. Okay. Again, in Turkish, these are per drop. So a per drop is very useful, is a very useful concept, but in Turkish, at least, the annotators have to be careful whether it is entity or implicit relation. There are also alternative lexicalization of discourse relations, and here I have a Polish example for you. It was annotated as an alternative expression. It's just like, okay? First, we annotated altlexes. Okay, altlexes are a very big group. They can be fixed forms like in response, or there can be free forms like that compares with. PDTB annotates all of them. In Turkish, we found that most altlexes involve a deictic element like buna rağmen, which is despite this. But the other ones also exist. We also annotated them, we noticed them. And this one is just like, I think, is an alternative lexicalization. In which part it is, I don't know. This part? Oh, it's implicit, I think. No, it's not implicit, right? No, it's not implicit. It's not. It is annotated alternative lexicalization. But I can't find where it is. Where is it's just like?
It's just like it's potak jakby.
This one. Okay, it's to talk. Okay, so you guys annotated this with a similarity relation at the time. Okay. Continuing with TED Multilingual Discourse Bank, there are also no relations. These are also annotated. No relations means relations that indicate weak semantic relations or no semantic relations. So in TED-MDB, these were usually topic shifts or listing relations. And in the Turkish Discourse Bank, they were more varied, involving many cases where no relation could be inferred. So it probably depends on the corpus as well. Now, how did we annotate Turkish Discourse Bank? Okay, as I said, there are several versions. In the first version, we only annotated single and multi-word explicits and their argument spans. One connector was searched anywhere in the text. We searched the whole corpus for a single connective, and we used an in-house built annotation tool. Once it is found, we annotated it together with binary arguments and modifiers. In the next version, we shifted to the PDTB annotator because we wanted to annotate implicits and senses. Okay, so we altlexes, binary arguments, senses, and in the final version, we went sentence by sentence. We checked the entire data, added no relations, intersentential implicit, as well as their argument spans. And in TDB 1, 2, Nora's enclosed was only at the intersentential level. Okay, so we went step by step. We didn't want to go to annotate everything all at once. But in our multilingual corpus, in the TED-MDB corpus, we annotated everything all at once because we thought we had experience enough, our annotators were good enough, and the team leaders also knew the discourse issues very well. So we asked the annotators to go sentence by sentence, annotate whatever they find explicit, implicit, altflex, or whatever, and annotate their senses. Okay. As I said, for Turkish, Portuguese, and Lithuanian, at the very end, and after that paper was published, intersentential implicits, only those conveyed by end, were annotated at a later stage. Now, I said that we have to pay attention to the linguistic characteristics of language, like the suffixes of Turkish, but we also have to pay attention to the language characteristics of the data. So when we were annotating TED-MDB, which is a set of, basically a set of transcribed spoken texts, it's a mix of spoken, written registers, but basically it's spoken, then written. It could be written before, but since it is presented, we can take it as a spoken form. The transcripts contain question-response pairs. The question is both asked and answered by the speaker for various rhetorical purposes, like to motivate the listener, to attract their attention or convince them to think in a specific way, hence they have a rhetorical function. So we came up with a top-level hypophora in TED-MDB. We called question answers hypophora. It was also annotated. We were working together with the PDTB, and the PDTB also used this idea to annotate PDTB 3 at that time. But afterwards, I gave more attention to hypophora. It actually involves questions and meaningful answers given to them. It's an important aspect of spoken language. It can also be found in written language. But it doesn't include all questions, like doesn't include rhetorical questions, check questions, or other questions that don't require an answer in the local discourse context. And PDTB 3 eventually came up with a pretty good set of guidelines. Now let's look at these examples from TED-MDB, all three languages, English, Portuguese, and Turkish. English, what gets us to convert success into mastery? This is a question I long asked myself. The same translation in Portuguese and Turkish. Now, if I was annotating TED-MDB today, I wouldn't annotate these as hypophora. There are questions, but there are no answers. But we have to live with this. I mean, maybe one day we will go back to TED-MDB and correct our mistake. But these do not fit the concept of hypophora that we originally came up with. Questions and meaningful answers. There should be answers given, but there are no answers given. This could be these sets of relations. I mean, questions and answers could be implicit relations when I think about it now. Okay, when I go back to what we have done in that corpus, but PDTB did it in the right way. PDTB updated the outlines, guidelines, and so on and so forth. But there are not too many Hippofora examples in TED-MDB anyway, so maybe we didn't do too much of a harm. Okay, now finally the evaluation. We used several measures, several ways of evaluating our corpus. For TED-MDB, two types were used. We evaluated discourse relation spotting, I mean, whether or not there is a discourse relation, and we used precision, the typical precision you call F1 measure for this. And then whether or not the discourse relation identified in two sets of annotations is of the same type, like explicit, implicit, we assess this differently. So these are two types of assessments. And discourse relation types, therefore, were assessed with Cohen's kappa. So we used both the standard measures and Cohen's kappa for different parts of the corpus, though, right? So here, this is from the paper, and it shows the formula of precision, recall, and F1. So I'll explain it very quickly. In this multilingual data set, TED-MDB, most teams had a primary annotator and a secondary annotator. So number of correct found tokens refers to the relations that are annotated by both annotators, but number of correct expected tokens refers to the relations that are annotated by the primary annotator. There was always the primary annotator, and we considered her or his annotations as gold. And as I said, for discourse relation type and top level senses, we used a simple ratio agreement as well as Cohen's kappa. This is again from that table. Now, let's look at Turkish Discourse Bank. In a conference in 2015, we had these exact match results. We first started with exact match, and we assessed implicit entity relations and explicit separately. And as you see here, even at that stage, I mean, 10 years ago, and TDB is constantly updated, but 10 years ago, our class level agreement was 0.8. I mean, exact match. Type 0.7. I mean, these are hierarchical senses in PDTB's terminology. Subtype is very low. See, but implicit, I mean, this is, I think, more important. Even at the top level, implicit agreement was very low. At the lower levels, the agreement goes even lower. So implicit annotation requires more care. Explicits are easier to annotate, but implicits require more care. So as we proceeded, we paid more attention to implicits, because of these low agreement results, sharpened our annotation guidelines and managed a better inter-annotator agreement. For instance, in the second version, TDB 1.2, again, exact match, we used a different system. We calculated agreement among common annotations. We didn't include the annotation of an annotator if she didn't annotate that sense, that relation. We only included those annotated by both annotators. So we did better in that way. And TDB 1.2 was, of course, after TDB 1.0. So our inter-annotator agreement results raised a little bit after certain changes that we made in the annotation guidelines and our calculation system methods. So what do we understand? What do we know now about the relations, about discourse structure of these languages? First of all, regarding explicit relations, in TED-MDB, it's pretty stable, 40 or 44% of the relations, but for Polish, we found a lower explicit level, explicit relation level. But for the other languages, more or less, I think due to translation, there are approximately 40% of the texts are explicit. But this still shows that there are other ways of expression, although explicit is the preferred way. The other relation types involve, of course, implicits, entrails, and no relations, and altflexes as well. When we looked at the implicit relations, there was a variation. English and Turkish was at one end of the spectrum. I mean, English and Turkish had the same split, 30 to 41%, but Portuguese had more implicits than the other languages. There may be various reasons, like Portuguese texts may be preferring implicitation and translation strategy more than the other languages, or maybe it's an annotation style. Entity relations was, entity relation was the smallest category in all the languages, and not too many entity relations. But we found Polish a higher number of entity relations, and the reason is given here. For instance, this is an English sentence with no annotation because there's no relation. In 1988, she won the gold in the heptathlon and set a record of 7.2 points, a score that no athlete has come very close to since. Well, this could have been annotated with and, but it was not annotated. Anyway, Polish annotated it with entity relation because obviously there's a translation difference. I think this annotation is correct. It talks about the records in the first sentence and it is expanded in the second sentence. So these are such reasons, such cases exist in TED-MDB, I mean translation issues. There are alternative lexicalizations, no connective expressions, a very low category in all TED-MDB languages, the lowest in Polish, the highest in Turkish. As I said, Turkish language has a high number of alternative lexicalizations. Okay. And no relations is quite stable across all languages in TED-MDB, and it's quite low. Now, after the TextLink project came to an end, we took the project forward a little bit more with some of our colleagues. For instance, as I said even before, with colleagues working on Portuguese and Lithuanian, we annotated VP conjunctions. And then afterwards, in this work in 2022, we annotated discourse relation annotations over English automatically aligned with the annotations over other languages and made them publicly available. So we did a alignment study after all the discourse relations afterwards. Because when we were creating TED-MDB, we didn't do sentence by sentence alignments. We could have, but we didn't want to because we wanted each team to pay attention to the characteristics of their language. But afterwards, we aligned discourse relations and found a high precision and recall in both cases in this paper. Going back to Turkish Discourse Bank, I keep shifting between these two corpora. This is the current stage, TDB 1.2, and we published in 2022. We have more implicits than any other discourse relations. We have almost like, it's pretty high in Turkish. Okay. The final thing that I want to say here is we investigated discourse, what we call discourse dependencies in Turkish Discourse Bank, following a research line explored by the PDTB team as well as the Czech group. And we examined discourse dependencies among 3 linearly ordered discourse units. Like discourse unit means any text span selected as an argument by one or both of the discourse connectives. And the object of our investigations was discourse unit 1, discourse connective 1, discourse unit 2, discourse connective 2, discourse unit 3. So a linear ordering was kept, was focused on. And we, by examining the Turkish Discourse Bank 1.3 with a Python script, we investigated the dependencies among these 3 discourse relations. Only those, nothing else. So here are some results from this analysis. Here is an implicit relation from, okay, let's see what we have. The relation between this text span and this span is an implicit relation, and also this text span and this one is also an implicit relation. The English is, this was not me because I would not look down, rather I would look into people's eyes. Now, what this means, what this dependency means is that this middle one is shared by the relation to its left and the relation to its right. This is called a shared argument. And there are so many of these in the corpus, also in the PDTB. A shared argument. This is not something that we have in syntax, obviously, but in discourse, maybe because of the annotation style we're following, we have these shared arguments. Another type of dependency that we have is embedding, a full embedding dependency structure. Here it is. Okay, there is this after relation here, all together, embedded as a argument of once. Okay, this is a Turkish one, and this is the embedded one, embedded argument in Turkish, and this is the embedded argument in English. Full embedding is obviously something we have in syntax, so maybe it's not a surprise to find it in discourse if we want to compare discourse dependencies with syntactic dependencies. There are also a number of full embedded arguments in the corpus. And finally, there is this type of embedded or dependent structure. We call it a properly contained dependency structure. It's very similar to fully embedded dependency, but there are some left out forms and left out parts. So again, this, okay, after wearing the hijab, he came down. This one is fully embedded as an argument 2 of the then relation. He hid at the terrace with the hijab, then after wearing the hijab, he came down. Okay, so this is a translation, and in Turkish we have a suffixal connective here, but it doesn't matter, the dependencies as it is explained. I think it would be the same dependency if we were annotating English. Okay, so there seems to be more research for discourse dependencies. This was just a start that we tried, and according to our findings on this paper, implicit discourse relation recognition tasks can be improved by considering where the arguments are, like embedded, full embedded, shared. It helps. And we can also devise an automatic argument span detection system, considering the availability of an entire discourse relation anchored by a connective as an argument, fully embedded or properly contained in a relation. We thought about these, but we didn't do them yet. So there's room for discourse research. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm ready for more questions.